A lone shot rang out in the crisp Montana air, startling Vanessa Porter from her concentrated work of hanging laundry. She instinctively ducked, years of frontier living having taught her to respect the sound of gunfire, but then straightened as she realized it had come from the shooting range behind Dawson's general store. The year was 1878, and Whitewater Creek was growing from a dusty outpost into a proper town with each passing month. That Mitchell Vale must be showing off again, her father grumbled from his rocking chair on the porch. At 62, Edward Porter had lost the use of his right leg after a mining accident, leaving Vanessa to manage their small homestead just outside of town. "He's teaching the Dawson boy to shoot," Vanessa replied, pinning a white sheet to the line. "I heard them arranging it yesterday at the store." HMPH, man's got no business being so good with a gun if he ain't the law or an army man. Something ain't right about him. Vanessa said nothing, but her eyes drifted toward town. Mitchell Vale had arrived in Whitewater Creek 6 months ago, setting up as a horse trainer and occasional hunting guide for wealthy Easterners who came west seeking adventure. He kept to himself mostly, polite but distant with everyone in town. There was something in his eyes that Vanessa had noticed the first time they'd met, a haunted look that spoke of burdens carried too long. "I'm heading into town for supplies," she said, finishing with the laundry. "Do you need anything special?" Her father waved her off. "Just the usual." "And don't dawdle with those gossips at the store." Vanessa smiled, tucked a stray strand of her auburn hair beneath her bonnet, and set off toward town. At 25, she had long since accepted that her life would be one of duty rather than adventure. After her mother's death from influenza 3 years prior, she had stepped fully into the role of caretaker, putting aside any dreams of her own. The dusty road into Whitewater Creek took 15 minutes to walk, and by the time Vanessa reached the main street, the sun was high overhead. The town consisted of one main thoroughfare with wooden buildings lining either side Dawson's general store, the Frontier Saloon, a small hotel, the sheriff's office, and various other establishments necessary for frontier life. As she approached the general store, she heard another shot, followed by a boy's delighted whoop. Curiosity got the better of her, and she rounded the corner of the building to the flat area behind it that served as an impromptu shooting range. Mitchell Vale stood with his back to her, a tall figure in dusty clothes and a wide-brimmed hat, showing 12-year-old Timothy Dawson how to hold a rifle properly. The target, a series of bottles on a fence rail, showed that several shots had already found their mark. "Keep both eyes open," Mitchell was saying in his low, measured voice, "and breathe out slowly as you squeeze the trigger." The boy followed his instructions, firing and missing the bottle by inches. "That was closer," Mitchell encouraged. "Try again." Vanessa lingered, watching the lesson. There was something gentle in the way Mitchell taught the boy, a patience that seemed at odds with his weathered appearance and the gun belt that always hung at his hip. As if sensing her presence, Mitchell suddenly turned, his hand instinctively dropping to his holster before he caught himself. When he saw Vanessa, something flickered across his face, a complex emotion she couldn't quite name. "Miss Porter," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Mr. Vale," she replied with a polite nod. "I hope I'm not interrupting your lesson." "We were just finishing up," Mitchell said, taking the rifle from young Timothy. "Mr. Dawson asked me to teach his boy some basics." Timothy groaned. "Can't we do just one more round, Mr. Vale?" Mitchell shook his head. "Your father needs help in the store, and I've got horses to tend to." He handed the boy a small wooden target. "Practice your aim with this when you have chores done. No real shooting without an adult present, remember?" "Yes, sir," Timothy said, disappointment clear in his voice as he trudged toward the store's back entrance. Left alone with Mitchell, Vanessa felt a strange awkwardness descend. Though they had exchanged pleasantries numerous times since his arrival in town, they had never had a proper conversation. "You're good with children," she observed. Mitchell's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Just showing him how not to shoot his foot off." He cleared his throat. "Can I help you with anything, Miss Porter?" "No, I'm just here for supplies. My father needs his medicines and we're low on flour." Mitchell nodded, then hesitated as if wanting to say something more. Instead, he simply touched his hat again. "Good day to you, then." As he turned to leave, Vanessa found herself calling after him. "Mr. Vale," he stopped, looking back at her with those troubled eyes that had first caught her attention. "The town picnic is this Sunday after church," she said, surprising herself with the words. "Everyone brings something to share. You'd be welcome to join us." For a moment, Mitchell looked genuinely startled, as if the simple invitation had caught him completely off guard. "I appreciate the invitation, Miss Porter, but I generally keep to myself." "Yes, everyone's noticed," she replied with a small smile. "That's precisely why you should come. People are starting to wonder if you're hiding something." His face paled slightly, and Vanessa immediately regretted her teasing words. "I just meant," she began. "I understand," he interrupted, his voice even. "Maybe I will come by, if only to quiet the speculation." The words held no warmth, and Vanessa felt a pang of embarrassment. "I didn't mean to imply it's fine, Miss Porter. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work waiting." Mitchell Vale walked away, his stride purposeful, leaving Vanessa with the distinct feeling that she had somehow touched a nerve. She sighed and headed into the store, resolving to be more careful with her words in the future. Inside Dawson's general store, the usual Saturday bustle greeted her. Women comparing fabric swatches, men discussing the weather and cattle prices, children eyeing the candy jars with longing. Tom Dawson, the proprietor, waved her over to the counter. "Afternoon, Miss Vanessa. Your usual order?" "Yes, please, Mr. Dawson, and some of that willow bark tea for father's leg pain if you have it." As Tom gathered her supplies, his wife Martha leaned over the counter. "I saw you talking with Mr. Vale outside," she said in a low voice, her eyes alight with curiosity. "That man is a mystery wrapped in an enigma, isn't he?" Vanessa kept her expression neutral. "He was just teaching Timothy to shoot safely." "Oh, he's handy enough with a gun, that's certain," Martha continued. "Sheriff Wilson says he's never seen anyone draw faster, even during his days down in Texas. Makes you wonder where a man learned such skills." "Perhaps he was a soldier," Vanessa suggested, not wanting to contribute to gossip but curious despite herself. Martha shook her head. "John Foster served in the war, and he says Vale doesn't carry himself like a military man, more like," she lowered her voice further, "a gunslinger." "Martha," Tom scolded gently, returning with Vanessa's order. "Don't go spreading notions about the man. He pays his bills promptly and hasn't caused any trouble." "I'm not saying he has," Martha defended. "I'm just saying there's more to Mitchell Vale than meets the eye. He came from somewhere with some kind of past, and it wasn't peaceful bookkeeping from the look of him." Vanessa paid for her goods and thanked the Dawsons, eager to be away from the speculation. As she stepped outside, she glanced down the street toward the livery stable where Mitchell had his quarters and business. She couldn't see him, but Martha's words echoed in her mind. Everyone had a past. Some were just heavier to carry than others. The Sunday picnic came with perfect weather, warm sunshine tempered by a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. Tables had been set up in the meadow beside the small white church, laden with food brought by the townspeople. Children ran and played while adults gathered in conversational groups. Vanessa had brought her mother's famous apple pie and was helping arrange the dessert table when she noticed a stir among the crowd. Mitchell Vale had appeared at the edge of the gathering, looking uncomfortable in clean clothes that still bore the marks of hasty ironing. He held a burlap sack in one hand and seemed to be debating whether to approach or flee. Sheriff Wilson, a broad man with a gray streaked beard, spotted him first and walked over with a welcoming wave. "Vale, glad you could join us. Come on over and meet some folks proper, like, instead of just nodding at them on the street." Mitchell said something in response that Vanessa couldn't hear, but he allowed himself to be led toward the tables. As the sheriff made introductions, Vanessa noticed how Mitchell maintained a careful distance from everyone, shaking hands briefly and answering questions with minimal words. His eyes occasionally scanned the perimeter of the gathering as if assessing potential threats. "What did he bring?" Martha Dawson whispered, appearing beside Vanessa. I have no idea, Vanessa replied, watching as Mitchell finally set his sack on the table and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. Venison jerky, he explained to those nearby. Made it myself, not much for cooking otherwise. The offering was enthusiastically received, particularly by the men who appreciated the smoky, well-seasoned meat. Mitchell seemed surprised by the positive reaction, a hint of relief softening his usually guarded expression. The sheriff encouraged everyone to start filling their plates, and the crowd dispersed toward the food tables. Vanessa busied herself serving pieces of her pie, but she was acutely aware of Mitchell hovering at the periphery of the gathering, plate in hand, but making no move to join any particular group. Making a sudden decision, Vanessa approached him after serving the last piece of pie. "Mr. Vale, there's room at our blanket if you'd care to join my father and me." Mitchell looked startled by the invitation. "Your father doesn't seem particularly fond of me, Miss Porter," Vanessa smiled. "He's not particularly fond of most people, it's nothing personal." A ghost of a smile touched Mitchell's lips, transforming his face for just a moment. "Then I appreciate the invitation." They walked together to where Edward Porter sat on a blanket spread on the grass, his bad legs stretched out before him. The old man's eyes narrowed as they approached. "Father, Mr. Vale will be joining us," Vanessa said, her tone making it clear this wasn't up for debate. Edward grunted but shifted to make room on the blanket. "Heard you're good with horses," he said gruffly as Mitchell carefully lowered himself to sit. "I manage well enough," Mitchell replied. "Better than well enough from what I hear. Clarence Bennett says that bay of his hasn't thrown a rider since you worked with it." Mitchell nodded, accepting the grudging compliment. Horse just needed to understand what was being asked of it. "Most animals do, and people," Edward challenged. Mitchell met the older man's gaze steadily. "People are considerably more complicated, sir." Something passed between the two men, a mutual recognition, perhaps, and Edward's posture relaxed slightly. "Can't argue with that." The conversation moved to safer topics: the weather, the coming harvest, local news. Vanessa observed Mitchell gradually becoming more at ease, though he still remained more listener than talker. When he did speak, his comments were thoughtful and occasionally revealed an education beyond what might be expected of a frontier horse trainer. After the meal, as families began to disperse for Sunday afternoon activities, Mitchell helped Vanessa fold the blanket while Edward chatted with Sheriff Wilson nearby. "Thank you for the invitation, Miss Porter," Mitchell said quietly. "It's been a long time since I participated in something like this." "Everyone needs community, Mr. Vale," she replied, matching his tone. "Even those who prefer solitude." He looked at her then with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Some people don't get to choose the life they want, Miss Porter. Sometimes the life chooses them." Before she could respond to this cryptic statement, Timothy Dawson came running up, out of breath with excitement. "Mr. Vale, Pa says there's a rattlesnake by our chicken coop. Can you help? He says you're the best shot in town." Mitchell's demeanor changed instantly, alert and focused. "Anyone been bitten?" "No, sir. Pa's keeping everyone away, but he's worried about the chickens." Mitchell nodded. "I'll come." He turned to Vanessa. "Excuse me, Miss Porter." "Of course," she said, watching as he strode away with Timothy, his hand unconsciously checking the gun at his hip. Edward returned to her side, following her gaze. "Man moves like he spent a lifetime watching his back," he observed. "What do you think his story is?" Vanessa asked. Her father shrugged. "Everyone's got things they'd rather forget, girl, some more than others. Whatever Vale's running from, it's nipping close at his heels from the look of him." Vanessa gathered their picnic things, her mind filled with questions about Mitchell Vale and the shadows that seemed to haunt him. The following week brought a heat wave that had everyone in Whitewater Creek moving slowly and seeking shade whenever possible. Vanessa rose before dawn to do the heaviest chores before the sun made work unbearable. She was in the vegetable garden, harvesting beans for that evening's dinner, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Mitchell Vale rode up on his chestnut gelding, looking as if he'd been in the saddle since daybreak. Dust coated his clothes and sweat had carved tracks through the dirt on his face. He reined in at the fence and removed his hat. "Miss Porter," he called, "is your father available?" Vanessa straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's inside. Is something wrong?" "No, madam. I've come about a business proposition." Curious, Vanessa led Mitchell to the house where Edward was whittling on the porch. The older man looked up with surprise as they approached. "Vale," he greeted with a nod. "What brings you out here in this heat?" Mitchell declined the offered chair, standing with his hat in his hands. "I've been contracted by some gentlemen from back east to lead a hunting expedition. They want to bag elk up in the high country." Edward raised an eyebrow. "And this concerns me how? They're bringing their own horses, eastern thoroughbreds that aren't suited for mountain terrain. I need to rent 4 solid mountain ponies for a 2-week trip." Mitchell gestured toward the corral where the Porter horses grazed. "You've got the best trained mountain stock in the county." Edward's weathered face remained impassive, but Vanessa could see the interest in his eyes. Since his injury, they'd had little use for all their horses, and the income from such a rental would be significant. "When would you need them?" Edward asked. "Party arrives by train next Tuesday. We leave Wednesday morning, back 2 weeks after." Edward considered for a moment. $15 per horse for the full time. Mitchell didn't flinch at the price, which Vanessa knew was on the high side. "Agreed." "I'll also need someone to help bring them into town Tuesday morning. I'll pay extra for that service." "Vanessa can handle that," Edward said before she could speak. "She knows the animals best anyway." Mitchell's eyes flickered to her, something like concern crossing his face. "It's a rough trail in places. I've been riding these mountains since I was a child, Mr. Vale," Vanessa said, slightly irked by his doubt. "I believe I can manage." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I don't doubt it, Miss Porter. Tuesday at dawn, then." Details were settled and Mitchell prepared to leave. As he mounted his horse, he paused, looking at Vanessa. "The jerky was a hit at the picnic. Your pie, too." The unexpected comment caught her off guard. "Thank you, it was my mother's recipe." Mitchell nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "She must have been a fine woman to raise a daughter like you." Without waiting for a response, he touched his spurs to his horse's flanks and rode away. Edward watched him go with a thoughtful expression. "Man's carrying a burden heavier than most," he observed. Vanessa looked at her father in surprise. "What makes you say that?" "Recognition," Edward said simply. "Each man knows his own kind." Tuesday came, and Vanessa rose well before dawn to prepare for the ride into town. She dressed in her most practical riding clothes, split skirt, sturdy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat to shield against the morning sun. After a quick breakfast and final instructions from her father, she saddled her own mare and attached lead ropes to the 4 mountain ponies they were renting to Mitchell's party. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as she set off, the string of horses following obediently behind her. The trail to town was familiar, but managing 5 horses required concentration, especially when crossing the narrow bridge over Whitewater Creek itself. She was about halfway to town when she heard a rider approaching. Mitchell appeared around a bend in the trail, the rising sun silhouetting him against the horizon. "Thought I'd meet you partway," he explained, reining in beside her. Those Easterners arrived on the midnight train, full of excitement and completely unprepared for what they're getting into. Vanessa laughed. "The usual type then?" "Worse," Mitchell sighed. "One brought a valet." This drew another laugh from Vanessa. "What does a valet do on a hunting expedition?" Polish his employer's boots after they're covered in trail dust, apparently. Mitchell shook his head, but there was amusement in his eyes. "I spent half the night explaining why the man couldn't bring 3 trunks of clothing into the wilderness." They rode side by side, the additional horses trailing behind them. Vanessa found herself studying Mitchell's profile, the strong jaw softened by 2 weeks' worth of beard, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the sun, the straight nose that had clearly been broken at least once. "How long have you been guiding?" she asked. "Officially, just since I came to Whitewater Creek, but I've spent most of my life outdoors one way or another. And before Whitewater Creek," she ventured, Mitchell's expression closed. "I moved around, Texas mostly, then Colorado for a while. What brought you here?" He was silent for so long that Vanessa thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "A desire for quiet, for anonymity." He glanced at her. "That didn't work out as planned. Small towns," Vanessa acknowledged with a smile. "Everyone knows everyone's business, or tries to," Mitchell amended. They reached the outskirts of town just as businesses were opening for the day. Mitchell led them to the livery stable where three expensively dressed men stood among piles of equipment, looking impatient and out of place in their tailored clothes. "Gentlemen," Mitchell called as they approached. "The horses have arrived. We can begin packing as soon as they're rested and watered." The oldest of the men, a portly fellow with an impressive mustache, stepped forward. "About time, Vale. We've been waiting since dawn." "As agreed, Mr. Harrington," Mitchell replied evenly. "Dawn is when we were to begin preparations. We'll be ready to leave by noon." Vanessa dismounted gracefully, leading her string of ponies into the livery yard. She could feel the Easterners' curious gazes as Mitchell introduced her. "Miss Porter has kindly brought the mountain ponies I mentioned. They're sure-footed and experienced with the terrain we'll be covering." Mr. Harrington looked skeptically at the sturdy, shaggy animals. "They're rather small, aren't they, and not much to look at." "They'll get you safely through mountain passes where your thoroughbreds would break a leg," Vanessa said firmly, "and they won't tire as quickly at altitude." The man seemed taken aback by her direct manner but nodded. "Very well, I defer to the local expertise." Mitchell helped Vanessa unsaddle the horses and get them settled in stalls with water and feed. As they worked, Vanessa noticed how the Easterners eyed Mitchell with a mixture of wariness and respect, giving him a wider berth than necessary. Clearly, they had been told or had somehow sensed that he was not a man to be trifled with. "Will you have breakfast at the hotel before you leave?" Vanessa asked as they finished their tasks. Mitchell nodded. "Once the packing is done." "These gentlemen insist on bringing enough supplies for a small army." Vanessa hesitated. "I should be getting back to father, but perhaps I could join you, for breakfast, I mean." The invitation surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise Mitchell. Something flickered in his eyes, pleasure perhaps, quickly shadowed by hesitation. "I'd enjoy the company," he said finally, "but won't your father be expecting you back?" "He knows these things take time," she replied. "And I brought food for both of us in my saddlebags, anticipating a wait." Mitchell's smile transformed his face, erasing years of hardness for a brief moment. "Then I'd be honored, Miss Porter." The hotel dining room was nearly empty when they entered, the morning rush having ended. They found a quiet table by the window, and the waitress brought coffee while they waited for their food. "Have you always lived in Whitewater Creek?" Mitchell asked after they had settled. Vanessa nodded. "Born and raised. My parents came west with one of the first wagon trains after the war. Father worked the silver mines until his accident 8 years ago." "And your mother?" Mitchell's voice was gentle. "Influenza took her 3 winters ago," Vanessa said, the familiar ache dulled but still present. "She taught school until she became too ill." "I'm sorry," Mitchell said, and the simple words held genuine sympathy. "Losing a parent leaves a hole that never quite fills. You speak from experience," he nodded. "My mother died when I was 14, father 2 years later. What happened after that?" Vanessa asked, sensing she was being granted rare access to Mitchell's closely guarded past. Mitchell stared into his coffee cup. "I fell in with people I shouldn't have, made choices that seemed necessary at the time." He looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "I'm not proud of much of my past, Miss Porter." Before Vanessa could respond, their food arrived, hearty plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they ate, but Vanessa found herself acutely aware of the man sitting across from her, his careful manners, the way his eyes continuously scanned the room, the deliberate way he kept his right hand free even while eating. As they finished their meal, Mitchell checked his pocket watch. "I should get back to those gentlemen before they decide to reorganize all the supplies." Vanessa nodded, suddenly reluctant for their time together to end. "How dangerous is this expedition, really?" Mitchell considered the question. "The terrain is challenging, and weather in the high country is unpredictable. But But the real danger is usually the clients themselves, city men who think they know more than they do and won't listen to advice. Will you be careful? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Mitchell looked at her with surprise, then something softer. I always am, Miss Porter, too many years of habit to be otherwise. They walked back to the livery together, the morning sun now high overhead. The Easterners had managed to create even more chaos in their absence, with equipment strewn across the yard. I should be getting back, Vanessa said, preparing to mount her mare. Father will be wondering. Mitchell helped her into the saddle, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Thank you for bringing the horses, he said, looking up at her, and for breakfast. You're welcome on both counts. She gathered her reins, then added impulsively, Be safe out there, Mr. Vale. I'll return these horses in good condition, he promised. It's not the horses I'm concerned about, Vanessa replied quietly. Mitchell's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. Finally, he touched the brim of his hat. 2 weeks, Miss Porter, I'll see you then. Vanessa rode home with confused emotions swirling through her mind. She had known Mitchell Vale for barely 2 months, had spoken with him at length only a handful of times, and yet she found herself drawn to him in a way that both intrigued and alarmed her. There was darkness in his past, he had as much as admitted it, and the whole town sensed it. But there was also decency and a deep-seated pain that called to something within her. Edward was waiting on the porch when she returned, his face creased with concern. Took you long enough, he grumbled. Run into trouble? No trouble, Vanessa replied, dismounting. Just took time to get everything arranged. The Eastern gentlemen aren't used to frontier preparations. Her father studied her face. You had breakfast with Vale. It wasn't a question, and Vanessa didn't bother denying it. Yes. He was polite and respectful. Edward grunted. Man can be polite and still be dangerous, girl. Remember that. Everyone in town says he's dangerous, but no one can point to anything he's actually done wrong, Vanessa argued, leading her horse to the watering trough. Because his type of trouble follows behind him, Edward said grimly. Just you keep your distance, Vanessa. Men like that bring storms with them, whether they mean to or not. But despite her father's warnings, Vanessa found her thoughts returning to Mitchell throughout the following days. She wondered where he was in the high country, whether the Easterners were making his job difficult, if he was thinking of Whitewater Creek and perhaps of her as he sat by a campfire under the stars. The 2 weeks of Mitchell's absence stretched endlessly. Vanessa kept busy with her usual chores, but found herself inventing reasons to visit town more frequently than necessary. On each visit, she would casually pass by the livery to check if the hunting party had returned early, looking for someone. Martha Dawson asked with a knowing smile when Vanessa made her 3rd visit to the general store in a week. Just restocking supplies, Vanessa replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. MMHMM, Martha hummed, not convinced. Well, when you're just restocking, you might be interested to know that Sheriff Wilson got a telegram yesterday. The hunting party will be back tomorrow or the day after. Seems they had good luck and are returning a few days early. Vanessa tried to keep her expression neutral. Father will be glad to have his horses back. I'm sure that's all he'll be glad about, Martha teased gently. The next day brought a late summer storm rolling in from the mountains. Vanessa worked quickly to secure everything around the homestead as dark clouds gathered on the horizon. By mid-afternoon, rain was falling in sheets, turning the yard to mud and the road into town into a treacherous ribbon of slick clay. She had just finished securing the chicken coop when her father called from the porch. Riders coming. Squinting through the downpour, Vanessa could make out a line of bedraggled horsemen approaching their property. As they drew closer, she recognized Mitchell at the lead, followed by the 3 Easterners and a string of pack horses laden with equipment and what appeared to be hunting trophies. Mitchell guided the party to the Porter's barn, where they all dismounted gratefully and led their horses out of the rain. Vanessa hurried to join them, carrying extra towels from the house. Mr. Vale, she greeted, unable to keep a smile from her face despite the miserable weather. You're back early. Mitchell pushed back his dripping hat, water streaming from the brim. Mr. Harrington shot his elk on the 4th day, he explained, nodding toward the oldest Easterner who was proudly overseeing the unloading of a massive set of antlers. The others got their trophies soon after. No point staying out in the wilderness once they'd bagged what they came for. The Easterners were in high spirits despite their drenched condition, clearly pleased with the success of their expedition. They chatted animatedly while Mitchell and Vanessa helped stable the horses. "You're all welcome to dry off in the house," Vanessa offered. "Father has coffee on the stove." Mr. Harrington stepped forward with a courtly bow that looked comical given his sodden appearance. "Most kind of you, Miss Porter, but we're eager to return to the comforts of the hotel. Our train leaves for Denver tomorrow morning." After settling payment for the horse rental with a generous bonus that made Edward's eyebrows rise, the Easterners mounted their own horses for the final ride into town. Mitchell, however, lingered. "If it's all right with you, Mr. Porter," he said, addressing Edward directly, "I'd like to stay and make sure these animals are properly cared for after the journey. They've earned some extra attention." Edward studied Mitchell for a moment, then nodded. "That's fair enough. Vanessa can show you where everything is." He turned and made his way back to the house, leaning heavily on his cane. Alone in the barn with Mitchell, Vanessa became acutely aware of how his wet shirt clung to his broad shoulders and the way water dripped from his dark hair onto his face. She busied herself finding brushes and liniment for the horses. "They look well cared for," she observed as Mitchell methodically began rubbing down the first pony. "No injuries or lameness. They performed admirably," Mitchell replied. "Sure-footed even on the steepest trails, just as you said." He worked in silence for a few moments, then added, "How have things been here?" "Quiet," Vanessa said, beginning to work on another horse. "Mrs. Dawson's youngest had a fever, but he's recovering well. And the Wilson's daughter announced her engagement to that young man from Denver she's been corresponding with." Mitchell listened attentively as Vanessa continued with local news, asking occasional questions that showed genuine interest. They worked side by side, moving from horse to horse until all were brushed, fed, and settled comfortably in fresh straw. Outside, the rain continued to fall, beating a steady rhythm on the barn roof. Mitchell moved to the door and looked out at the downpour. "I should head to town," he said, though he made no move to saddle his horse. "In this weather, you'd be soaked through again before you reach the creek," Vanessa protested. "Father would insist you stay for dinner, at least until the rain lets up." Mitchell hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. "I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition to feed someone who spent 2 weeks guiding Easterners through the wilderness," Vanessa said firmly. "Besides, I want to hear more about the expedition." A smile tugged at the corner of Mitchell's mouth. "As the lady wishes, then." They dashed through the rain to the house, arriving on the porch breathless and laughing despite being drenched. Edward looked up from his chair by the fire, surprise crossing his face at the sound of his daughter's laughter, a sound that had become increasingly rare in recent years. "Mr. Vale will be joining us for dinner, Father," Vanessa announced. "I'll fetch him some dry clothes of yours, if that's all right." Edward nodded slowly. "In the trunk at the foot of my bed should be some things that'll fit well enough." While Mitchell changed in the small back room, Vanessa quickly tidied the kitchen and added extra ingredients to the stew she'd started earlier. She changed into a dry dress as well, taking a moment to brush her hair and pin it neatly. When Mitchell emerged wearing Edward's old flannel shirt and trousers, he looked more relaxed than Vanessa had ever seen him. He had trimmed his beard, and with his hair combed back from his face, he appeared younger, the hard lines around his mouth softened. Dinner was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Edward, initially taciturn, gradually warmed up as Mitchell described the hunting expedition with humor and vivid detail. The Easterners' mishaps from Mr. Harrington falling into a stream while trying to fill his canteen to the youngest member of the party mistaking a marmot for a bear had both Porters laughing heartily. "And then," Mitchell continued, leaning forward with his elbows on the table, "Harrington's valet tried to iron his shirt using a flat rock heated in the campfire, burned a perfect iron-shaped hole right through it. Serves him right for bringing a valet hunting, Edward chuckled, refilling Mitchell's coffee cup. In my day, men weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. To be fair, sir, Harrington proved tougher than I expected, Mitchell said. Didn't complain once about the hard riding, and he field-dressed his own elk without hesitation. As the evening progressed, Vanessa noticed Mitchell occasionally glancing at the window, tracking the storm's progress. By the time they had finished eating, the rain had slackened to a gentle patter. I should be going, Mitchell said, rising from the table. Thank you both for your hospitality. Nonsense, Edward said gruffly. Roads will be mudslides by now. You can take the spare room for the night and head out in the morning when things have dried a bit. Mitchell looked genuinely startled by the offer. That's very generous, but no point risking your neck or your horses, Edward interrupted. Vanessa, show him to the spare room while I bank the fire. Vanessa led Mitchell down the short hallway to the small room that had once been hers as a child, before she had moved into her mother's sewing room after her death. It's not much, she apologized, lighting the lamp on the bedside table, but the bed is comfortable. Mitchell stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Your father surprises me, he said quietly. I didn't think he approved of me, Vanessa smiled. Father judges men by their actions, not their reputations. You've proven yourself honest and hardworking. She hesitated, then added, and I think he enjoys having another man to talk to. It's been lonely for him since Mother died. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Miss Porter, for everything. I think after all this you might call me Vanessa, she suggested, feeling a flutter of nervousness. The smile that spread across Mitchell's face transformed him. Vanessa, he repeated softly. Then you must call me Mitchell. Mitchell, she echoed, liking the way his name felt on her lips. Good night, then. Good night, Vanessa. She closed the door behind her, her heart beating faster than it had any right to. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed everything clean. Vanessa rose early, as was her habit, and was surprised to find Mitchell already up and outside, splitting wood by the chopping block. You don't have to do that, she said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. Mitchell set the axe down and accepted the offered cup gratefully. Seems a fair exchange for the hospitality, he replied. Your father mentioned the woodpile was getting low. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun climb higher in the eastern sky. The world had that fresh, washed quality that comes after a storm, colors more vivid, air more crisp, every detail sharper somehow. Will you be taking another expedition soon? Vanessa asked, not looking at him. Mitchell shook his head. Not until next month. A geology professor from back east wants to study rock formations in the northern ranges. He hesitated, then added, I'll be around Whitewater Creek until then. Vanessa felt a disproportionate sense of pleasure at this news. Perhaps you'll come to the harvest dance at the end of the month. The whole town attends. I'm not much of a dancer, Mitchell admitted. Neither am I, Vanessa confessed with a small laugh. Mother tried to teach me, but I have 2 left feet according to father. Then we can be awkward together, Mitchell suggested, a warmth in his eyes that made Vanessa's breath catch. Edward appeared on the porch, interrupting whatever might have been said next. Breakfast is nearly ready, he called. Vale, there's hot water for washing up if you need it. Over breakfast, the 3 discussed practical matters: the condition of the horses, payment for their use, the coming harvest season. It was all very ordinary, and yet Vanessa felt an undercurrent of something new and fragile developing between her and Mitchell. When it was time for Mitchell to leave, Edward shook his hand firmly. You're welcome here anytime, Vale. Good to have someone around who can handle an axe properly. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that more than you know. Vanessa walked with Mitchell to the barn where his horse was stabled. As he saddled the chestnut gelding, an awkward silence fell between them, heavy with things unsaid. Thank you again for your hospitality, Mitchell finally said, leading his horse into the yard. It's been a long time since I've experienced anything like it. You're always welcome here, Vanessa said, echoing her father's words but infusing them with a warmth all her own. Mitchell mounted his horse, looking down at her with an expression that seemed to hold both longing and reservation. I'll see you in town, then. Yes, Vanessa agreed, stepping back, and at the harvest dance. With a final nod, Mitchell turned his horse toward town. Vanessa watched him go, a mixture of emotions swirling within her. There was something about Mitchell Vale, something beyond his handsome features and quiet strength that called to her in a way no man ever had before. The weeks leading up to the harvest dance passed in a curious blend of routine and anticipation. Vanessa saw Mitchell in town during her regular visits, and each encounter seemed to deepen the connection between them. They were never alone together, always meeting in public spaces, the general store, the street, once at church when Mitchell surprised everyone by attending the Sunday service. Yet despite the public nature of their interactions, Vanessa sensed a growing intimacy in their conversations, a careful sharing of thoughts and observations that revealed more of who they were to each other. Mitchell remained guarded about his past, but he spoke freely of his present interests and future hopes, his plans to expand his horse training business, his enjoyment of the Montana landscape, his appreciation for the relative peace of Whitewater Creek. Vanessa, in turn, found herself sharing things she rarely discussed with others: her love of reading, her occasional loneliness on the homestead, her conflicted feelings about a life defined by duty to her father. "Don't you ever want something different?" Mitchell asked one afternoon as they stood outside the general store. Edward was inside settling an account, giving them a rare moment relatively alone. Vanessa considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I love Father and I know he needs me, but there are days when I wonder what else might have been possible." "What would you do if you could choose anything?" Mitchell's eyes were intent on her face, genuinely interested in her answer. "I've always wanted to teach like Mother," Vanessa said, surprised by how easily the confession came. "She taught me a love of books and learning that I've never lost. I think I'd be good at passing that on to children." Mitchell nodded slowly. "You would be. You have patience and kindness, essential qualities for a teacher." The simple validation of her dream, stated as if it were an obvious truth rather than an impossible fancy, touched Vanessa deeply. Before she could respond, Edward emerged from the store and the moment passed. The night of the harvest dance arrived with perfect autumn weather, cool enough for ladies to wear their prettier dresses without overheating in the crowded hall, but not so cold as to make the journey uncomfortable. The town hall had been decorated with corn shocks, pumpkins, and colorful leaves gathered by the schoolchildren. Oil lamps and candles cast a warm glow over the proceedings, and a small band of local musicians tuned their instruments in the corner. Vanessa had spent more time than usual on her appearance, wearing a dress of deep blue that she had carefully altered from one of her mother's gowns. The color brought out the auburn highlights in her hair, which she had arranged in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun. "You look like your mother," Edward said gruffly as they prepared to leave for town. "She'd be proud of the woman you've become." The unexpected compliment brought tears to Vanessa's eyes. "Thank you, Father." They arrived at the hall to find the celebration already underway. Nearly everyone in Whitewater Creek and the surrounding homesteads had gathered for the annual event. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and the center of the room had been cleared for dancing. Vanessa scanned the crowd as she helped her father to a chair near some of his contemporaries, but she didn't see Mitchell. Disappointment threatened to dampen her spirits, but she reminded herself the night was young. "Miss Porter," Sheriff Wilson approached with a gallant bow, "would you honor me with the first dance?" Vanessa accepted with a smile, allowing the older man to lead her onto the dance floor. The sheriff was a surprisingly graceful dancer, guiding her through the steps with ease. "Your friend Vale clean up nicely," the sheriff commented, nodding toward the entrance of the hall. Vanessa glanced over her shoulder, her heart skipping a beat. Mitchell stood in the doorway, almost unrecognizable in a dark suit, white shirt, and string tie. His hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed close, and without his usual hat, he looked younger and somehow more vulnerable. Their eyes met across the room, and Mitchell gave her a small nod of recognition. He made his way around the perimeter of the hall, exchanging greetings with townspeople but clearly making his way toward her. When the dance ended, Vanessa thanked the sheriff and moved to meet Mitchell halfway. Up close, she could see that his suit, while well made, bore signs of age and careful maintenance. The thought that he had made such an effort for the occasion warmed her. "You came," she said simply. "I promised I would." Mitchell's eyes took in her appearance, and something in his expression made her cheeks warm. "You look beautiful, Vanessa." "Thank you, you look quite handsome yourself." Mitchell glanced around at the crowded hall. "I haven't been to something like this in a very long time." "Are you still willing to risk dancing with me?" Vanessa asked lightly. A genuine smile crossed Mitchell's face. "I believe I am." As if on cue, the band struck up a waltz. Mitchell offered his hand and Vanessa placed hers in it, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. Despite his earlier claims of being unpracticed, Mitchell moved with natural grace, keeping time with the music and guiding her with a gentle but confident hand at her waist. "You said you couldn't dance," Vanessa accused softly as they moved among the other couples. "I said I wasn't much of a dancer," Mitchell corrected. "It's been a long time, but some things you don't forget." "Where did you learn? Not on the cattle trails, I imagine." Mitchell's expression flickered, a shadow of something passing behind his eyes. "My mother insisted on lessons when I was young. She had aspirations for me beyond what my father envisioned." Vanessa sensed that behind this simple statement lay a more complex story, but she didn't press. Instead, she allowed herself to enjoy the moment, the music, the movement, the solid presence of Mitchell's hand at her waist. They danced 3 dances together, drawing curious glances from the townspeople. Vanessa was aware of Martha Dawson watching them with particular interest from where she stood with her husband, and she knew that by tomorrow, speculation about her and Mitchell would be all over town. Strangely, the thought didn't bother her as it might have once. Let them talk. For the first time in years, she felt fully alive, fully present in her own life rather than merely going through the motions of duty. After the 3rd dance, Mitchell escorted her to where her father sat with his friends. Edward looked up at their approach, his expression unreadable. "Vale," he acknowledged with a nod. "Didn't know you were one for dancing." "Neither did I, sir," Mitchell replied with a hint of humor. "Your daughter has been kind enough to refresh my memory." Edward harumphed, but Vanessa could tell he wasn't truly displeased. "You young folks go enjoy yourselves. These old bones are content to watch." Throughout the evening, Vanessa divided her time between dancing with Mitchell and various other partners, making sure to spend time with her father and helping Martha Dawson keep the refreshment table organized. Mitchell seemed to relax as the night progressed, even engaging in conversation with some of the local men who had previously regarded him with suspicion. As the celebration began to wind down, Mitchell found Vanessa by the punch bowl. "Would you and your father allow me to escort you home?" he asked quietly. Vanessa nodded, pleased by the offer. "Let me check with father, but I'm sure he won't object. His leg has been bothering him more than usual tonight." Edward did indeed welcome the assistance, allowing Mitchell to help him into the porter's wagon while Vanessa gathered their belongings. The ride home was peaceful, the night air cool and clear, stars brilliant overhead. Edward dozed off in the back of the wagon, leaving Vanessa and Mitchell alone with their thoughts on the driver's seat. "Thank you for tonight," Vanessa said softly, not wanting to wake her father. "I can't remember when I've enjoyed an evening more." Mitchell glanced at her, his profile illuminated by moonlight. "Nor can I," he admitted. "I've spent so long keeping to myself, I'd forgotten what it's like to be part of something." "Part of a community, you mean?" "That," Mitchell agreed, "and part of—" He trailed off, seeming to search for words. "Part of what?" Vanessa prompted gently. Mitchell's hands tightened on the reins. "Part of someone else's life," he finally said, "in a way that matters." The simple honesty of the statement touched Vanessa deeply. She reached out, placing her hand over his on the reins. "You are part of our lives now, Mitchell. Mine and father's both." He turned his hand beneath hers, interlacing their fingers for a brief, precious moment before returning his attention to the road. They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, both aware that something significant had changed between them. At the Porter homestead, Mitchell helped Edward into the house while Vanessa tended to the horses. When the men emerged onto the porch, Edward was leaning heavily on his cane but looked pleased about something. "Vale's staying in the spare room again tonight," he announced to Vanessa. "No sense in him riding back to town at this hour. I'm turning in. Good night to you both." After Edward had gone inside, Mitchell and Vanessa remained on the porch, neither quite ready to end the evening. The night was crisp but not uncomfortably cold, the stars impossibly bright in the clear Montana sky. "Your father is a good man," Mitchell said, leaning against the porch railing. "More generous than I deserve." "Why do you say that?" Vanessa asked, moving to stand beside him. Mitchell was silent for a long moment, staring out at the darkness. "Because he doesn't know who I really am, what I've done." The weight in his voice made Vanessa's heart ache. "And who are you, Mitchell Vale?" He turned to look at her then, his eyes shadowed with a pain so deep it took her breath away. "Someone who's tried to outrun his past for so long he's forgotten how to live in the present." Vanessa reached out, touching his arm gently. "Maybe it's time to stop running." Mitchell covered her hand with his own. "If only it were that simple," he sighed, seemed to come to a decision. "Vanessa, there are things about me you should know before this goes any further." "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," she assured him. "That's just it," Mitchell said quietly. "I want to tell you, for the first time in years, I want someone to know the truth. I want you to know." Vanessa nodded, understanding the significance of what he was offering. "Then I'm listening." Mitchell took a deep breath. "My name isn't Mitchell Vale, or at least it wasn't always. I was born Matthew Vance in a small town in Texas." He paused, watching her face carefully for reaction. "Why did you change it?" Vanessa asked simply. "Because Matthew Vance had a price on his head in 3 states, Mitchell said bluntly. "Not for anything I'm proud of." Vanessa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air, but she kept her expression calm. "What happened?" Mitchell or Matthew moved away from the railing, pacing the small porch as if physical movement might make the telling easier. "After my parents died, I fell in with a gang led by a man named Blackstone. I was young, angry, alone. He offered belonging, purpose, excitement." His mouth twisted bitterly. What he delivered was blood and betrayal. "You were part of an outlaw gang," Vanessa said, not as a question but as an acknowledgement of fact. Mitchell nodded. "For 3 years. Mostly cattle rustling and small-time robbery at first, but Blackstone's appetites grew. He wanted bigger scores, didn't care who got hurt." He stopped pacing, looking directly at Vanessa. "I want you to understand I never killed anyone in cold blood, but I was there when others did. I rode with them, shared in the spoils. That makes me guilty all the same." Vanessa absorbed this in silence, trying to reconcile the man before her with the outlaw he described. "What changed? Why did you leave?" "A bank robbery in a town called Clearwater," Mitchell said, his voice dropping. "It was supposed to be simple in and out before the law could respond. But Blackstone shot the teller for no reason other than the man was too slow opening the safe. Then things went bad. A young deputy tried to stop us. Blackstone shot him too." Mitchell closed his eyes briefly, the memory clearly painful. The deputy couldn't have been more than 20. "Had a sweetheart in town. I found out later they were to be married the following month. Her name was Victoria." Vanessa felt her breath catch. "Victoria," Mitchell nodded, his eyes haunted. "Victoria Pierce." The significance of the name wasn't lost on Vanessa. Victoria P. The same initials as her own. She wondered if that connection had drawn Mitchell to her in some unconscious way. "What happened after?" she asked softly. "I couldn't do it anymore," Mitchell said. "That night I took my share of the money and rode out. Left most of it with the dead deputy's sweetheart anonymously, of course. Used the rest to get as far away from Texas as I could. Changed my name, tried to start over." He laughed without humor. "I've been starting over ever since. 5 years, 5 different towns. And Whitewater Creek is the 6th, Vanessa concluded. "Yes." Mitchell's gaze was steady now, watching for her reaction. "I've been honest in my dealings here. Haven't touched a gun except for hunting and self-defense since Clearwater, but the past doesn't just disappear because you want it to." Vanessa considered everything he had told her, turning it over in her mind. She should be shocked, repelled even. This man had been an outlaw, had participated in robberies where people died. Yet she found herself focusing not on those acts, but on the evident remorse that had shaped his life since. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked finally. Mitchell moved closer, close enough that she could see the pain and hope warring in his eyes. "Because what's growing between us? It's too important to be built on lies. You deserve to know who I am, who I was before things go any further." "And who are you now, Mitchell Vale?" Vanessa challenged gently. "A man trying to be better than he was," he answered simply. "A man who, for the first time in years, can imagine a future instead of just running from the past." He reached out, hesitated, then carefully took her hands in his. "A man who is falling in love with you, Vanessa, against his better judgment." The confession stole her breath. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up to his face. "And if I can accept who you were as part of who you are now," hope flared in Mitchell's eyes, "then I'd be the most fortunate man alive. But I need you to understand there's always a chance the past could catch up to me. The law, or Blackstone, or someone else from those days. I've put you at risk just by being in your life." Vanessa thought of all the safe, respectable men she had known, men who had expressed interest in her over the years, men her father would have approved of without reservation. None had ever made her feel as alive as Mitchell did, with his quiet strength and wounded heart. "I think," she said slowly, "that some risks are worth taking." Mitchell's hands tightened on hers. Vanessa, whatever he might have said, was interrupted by the sound of a horse approaching at speed. Both turned toward the sound, Mitchell's hand instinctively moving to his hip where his gun would normally be. A rider emerged from the darkness, reining his horse to a stop in front of the porch. It was young Billy Wilson, the sheriff's son, out of breath and clearly agitated. "Miss Porter." "Mr. Vale, Pa sent me to fetch you both. There's trouble in town, men asking after you, Mr. Vale. Pa says they don't look friendly." Mitchell's face went hard, all emotion wiped clean. "How many?" "3," Billy replied. "Rode in an hour ago, started drinking at the saloon and asking questions. One of them showed Pa a wanted poster, said it was you, only with a different name." Vanessa felt cold fear wash over her. "Blackstone," she whispered. Mitchell shook his head. "He'd never come himself, likely sent men after me." He turned to Billy. "What did your pa tell them?" "Said he'd never heard of no Matthew Vance, that the only stranger in town was Mitchell Vale, who trains horses and does guide work. They didn't believe him, though. Said they'd wait." Mitchell nodded grimly. "Good lad. Ride back and tell your pa I'll be there shortly. Tell him to keep his distance, these aren't men to trifle with." Billy nodded and spurred his horse back toward town. Mitchell turned to Vanessa, his expression bleak. "I have to go. I'm coming with you," Vanessa said immediately. "No," Mitchell's voice was firm. "I won't put you in danger." "They don't know me," Vanessa argued, "but they'll be suspicious if you ride in alone. If we arrive together, as if returning from the dance, it might buy you a few moments to assess the situation." Mitchell hesitated, clearly torn. "Your father will understand," Vanessa finished. She squeezed his hands. "I'm not letting you face this alone, Mitchell." The gratitude in his eyes was almost painful to see. "Let me speak to your father first. He deserves to know what's happening." Edward took the news of Mitchell's true identity with surprising equanimity. He listened in silence as Mitchell gave an abbreviated version of what he had already told Vanessa, then asked a few pointed questions about the men in town. "Bounty hunters?" Edward asked. Mitchell nodded. "Most likely. Blackstone wouldn't waste his own men on me after all this time, but he might have put out the word that he'd pay for information on my whereabouts." Edward's weathered face was grave. "And you intend to ride into town and face them?" "I can't run forever," Mitchell said. "And I won't bring trouble to your doorstep after all your kindness." Edward studied him for a long moment. "The law is one thing, Vale or Vance or whatever you call yourself. Hired guns are another. You don't owe them the courtesy of a fair fight." "I know," Mitchell agreed. "But if I run, they'll just follow. Better to end it now, on ground I know, with people forewarned." Edward turned to his daughter. "And you're determined to go with him?" Vanessa nodded. "Yes, father." A complex emotion crossed Edward's face, pride mingled with fear. "Then take my shotgun," he said to Mitchell. It's loaded and ready behind the door, and Vanessa, his voice softened, be careful, girl. I've already buried your mother. I couldn't bear to bury you too. The ride into town was tense and silent. Vanessa and Mitchell had changed back into their everyday clothes, the festivity of the harvest dance now seeming like a distant memory. Mitchell had Edward's shotgun across his saddle and his own revolver at his hip, its familiar weight both comforting and troubling after months of wearing it only for practical purposes. "What's your plan?" Vanessa asked as the lights of Whitewater Creek came into view. "Get you somewhere safe," Mitchell replied. "Then talk to Sheriff Wilson, see what we're dealing with. These men might be reasonable if they realize I'm not worth the trouble." Vanessa doubted it would be that simple, but she nodded. "The Dawsons would take me in." "Good." Mitchell's voice was tight. "Vanessa, if this goes badly, it won't," she interrupted. "If it does," he insisted, "I want you to know these past months have been the happiest of my life. Meeting you, being accepted by you and your father, it's more than I ever thought I'd have again." Vanessa reached across the space between their horses, touching his arm. "Tell me that again when this is over," she said firmly, "because it will be over and you will still be here." Mitchell didn't answer, but the look he gave her held both love and a deep sadness that made her heart ache. They entered town from the north, deliberately taking a route that would bring them past the sheriff's office before the saloon. Sheriff Wilson was waiting on the boardwalk, his expression grave. "Vale," he greeted as they dismounted. "Miss Porter, situation's gotten worse. They're drinking heavily and making threats. Mentioned burning you out if you didn't show yourself by morning." "How many townspeople in the saloon?" Mitchell asked. "Just Tom Baker tending bar and a couple of ranch hands from the Reynolds place," the sheriff replied. "Most folks went home after the dance." Mitchell nodded, thinking, "I need you to get Vanessa somewhere safe, then clear anyone else off the street." Sheriff Wilson glanced at Vanessa, then back to Mitchell. "The men are asking for Matthew Vance. That you?" "It was," Mitchell admitted. "A long time ago." The sheriff absorbed this with a frown. "You been straight since you came to Whitewater Creek?" "Yes, sir." Wilson studied him for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "That's good enough for me. I'll take Miss Porter to Martha Dawson's place myself, then help you deal with these troublemakers." Relief flooded Mitchell's face. "Thank you, Sheriff." Vanessa, however, was not so easily managed. "I'm not hiding while Mitchell faces danger," she protested. "Vanessa," Mitchell said, his voice gentle but firm, "I need to know you're safe, please." She wanted to argue further, but the look in his eyes stopped her. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said instead. "Promise me you'll come for me when it's over." "I promise," Mitchell said solemnly. Reluctantly, Vanessa allowed the sheriff to escort her toward the Dawsons' home behind the general store. As they walked away, she looked back to see Mitchell checking his revolver, his face set in grim determination. Martha Dawson welcomed Vanessa with alarm and curiosity, quickly ushering her inside while the sheriff explained the situation in low tones. After extracting a promise from Martha to keep Vanessa indoors, Wilson hurried back to help Mitchell. "What in heaven's name is going on?" Martha demanded once they were alone. "Tom told me about those rough men asking after someone called Vance, but what does that have to do with Mr. Vale, and why are you involved?" Vanessa sank into a chair at the Dawsons' kitchen table, suddenly exhausted. "It's a long story, Martha." "Well, I've got coffee brewing and nothing but time," Martha replied, sitting across from her. "Start talking." In the simplest terms she could manage, Vanessa explained Mitchell's past and the situation they now faced. She omitted the most damning details, presenting Mitchell as a young man who had fallen in with bad company but had reformed years ago. Martha listened without interruption, her expressive face showing shock, concern, and eventually something like understanding. "So he's been running all this time," she said when Vanessa finished. "Poor man, no wonder he keeps to himself." "You're not horrified?" Vanessa asked, surprised by Martha's reaction. Martha snorted. "Girl, half the men in Montana have something in their past they'd rather not talk about. The West isn't built by saints." She reached across the table, patting Vanessa's hand. "What matters is who he is now, and from what I've seen, Mitchell Vale is a good man, whatever name he was born with. Tears of relief and gratitude sprang to Vanessa's eyes. "Thank you, Martha." A gunshot shattered the night, making both women jump to their feet. It was followed quickly by two more in rapid succession. "No," Vanessa gasped, moving toward the door. Martha caught her arm. "You promised to stay inside." Another shot rang out, then another. Vanessa wrenched free of Martha's grasp. "I can't just wait here while Mitchell might be dying." She flung open the door and ran into the street, Martha's protests fading behind her. The gunfire had come from the direction of the saloon. Heart pounding, Vanessa raced toward it, heedless of danger. As she rounded the corner onto the main street, she saw a scene of chaos. One man lay motionless in the dirt outside the saloon. Sheriff Wilson was crouched behind a water trough, bleeding from what appeared to be a graze on his arm, and Mitchell was nowhere to be seen. Another shot exploded from inside the saloon, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the window. Vanessa froze, terror clutching at her heart. Was Mitchell inside? Was he hurt? Dead? She was about to rush forward when a strong arm caught her around the waist, dragging her into the shadow of the barber shop. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Mitchell's voice hissed in her ear. Relief flooded her so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. "Mitchell, you're alive." "No thanks to you," he said harshly, though his arm remained protective around her. "I told you to stay with Martha." "I heard gunshots," Vanessa explained, turning to face him. In the dim light, she could see a bleeding cut along his cheekbone where a bullet must have grazed him. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" Mitchell shook his head. "I'm fine, but there are still two of them in the saloon and they've got Tom Baker as a hostage." "What do they want? Me, dead or alive?" Mitchell said grimly. "Preferably dead, it's less trouble. What are we going to do?" Mitchell's expression softened slightly at her use of we, but he remained focused. "I'm going to try to get behind the saloon through the livery. You are going to stay right here until it's over." "Mitchell, no arguments, Vanessa, not this time." His voice was gentle but implacable. "These men won't hesitate to use you against me if they get the chance. I can't focus on stopping them if I'm worried about you." Vanessa wanted to protest, but she recognized the logic of his position. "Be careful," she whispered instead, touching his face gently. "Come back to me." Mitchell caught her hand, pressing a quick, fierce kiss to her palm. "Wait for the all-clear from Wilson," he instructed, then slipped away into the darkness. Vanessa remained hidden in the shadows, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it could be heard across the street. She could see Sheriff Wilson still crouched behind the water trough, occasionally exchanging words with the men inside the saloon. "Vance," a rough voice called from within the building. "We know you're out there. Come on in and face us like a man, or the barkeep gets a bullet. Let Baker go." Wilson shouted back, "He's got nothing to do with this." "Then send us Vance," came the reply. "We've got a debt to settle for Mr. Blackstone." The standoff continued for what felt like an eternity to Vanessa, though it was likely only minutes. She strained to see any sign of Mitchell, but the night had swallowed him completely. Suddenly, a crash came from inside the saloon, followed by a shout of surprise and a gunshot. Sheriff Wilson immediately rose and rushed toward the batwing doors, his own gun drawn. More gunfire erupted, 3 shots in rapid succession, then silence. Vanessa held her breath, paralyzed with fear. The silence stretched unbearably, then Sheriff Wilson appeared at the saloon doors. "Miss Porter," he called, "it's over, you can come out now." On shaking legs, Vanessa crossed the street. "Mitchell?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "He's inside," Wilson said, his expression unreadable. "Better hurry." Vanessa pushed past him into the saloon, terrified of what she might find. The interior was a mess, tables overturned, glass shattered, the mirror behind the bar cracked from a stray bullet. Tom Baker sat on a chair, being tended to by one of the ranch hands. A body lay crumpled near the back door. And there was Mitchell, leaning against the bar, a bloody cloth pressed to his shoulder but very much alive. "Mitchell?" Vanessa cried, rushing to him. He straightened as she approached, wincing slightly but managing a tired smile. "I told you I'd come back to you." "You're hurt," she said, gently pulling the cloth away to examine the wound. "Just a graze," Mitchell assured her. "I've had worse shaving." "Don't joke," Vanessa scolded, tears threatening. "I thought you were dead." Mitchell's expression sobered. I'm sorry for frightening you." He glanced at the body on the floor. "But it's truly over now. The third man surrendered to Wilson. He's locked in the jail. And Blackstone," the survivor told Wilson that Blackstone is dead, killed in a gunfight in Texas 6 months ago. Mitchell shook his head, a complex emotion crossing his face. "All this time I've been running from a ghost." Vanessa helped Mitchell to a chair, then fetched clean water and bandages to properly tend his wound. Sheriff Wilson came to take their statements, confirming that the bounty hunters had fired first and that Mitchell had acted in self-defense. "What happens now?" Vanessa asked when they were finally alone again, Mitchell's shoulder bandaged and the saloon emptied of onlookers. "I don't know," Mitchell admitted. "The law may still want Matthew Vance even if Blackstone is gone." "Would you leave Whitewater Creek?" The thought made Vanessa's heart ache. Mitchell reached for her hand. "Not unless I had to, and not without asking you to come with me." Vanessa's breath caught. "You would want that, more than anything," Mitchell said softly. "But I have no right to ask it of you. Your father needs you, and I'm still a man with a past that could resurface at any time." Vanessa squeezed his hand. "Let's cross that bridge if we come to it. For tonight, let's just be grateful you're alive." Mitchell nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "There's something else I need to tell you, Vanessa, something I've carried far too long." "What is it?" she asked, sensing the weight of his words. Mitchell took a deep breath. "That night in Clearwater, after the robbery went bad, I didn't just leave the gang. I went to the sheriff the next town over and gave him information on Blackstone's operation. Not my name, I was too cowardly for that, but enough details that they were able to track the gang to their hideout." He paused, his expression haunted. "There was a shootout. 3 of the gang were killed, including a young man named Samuel who joined around the same time I did. He was barely 18. Vanessa waited, knowing there was more to the story. "Samuel had a sister," Mitchell continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Her name was Victoria Pierce." Vanessa's eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. "The same Victoria who lost her fiancé in the bank robbery." Mitchell nodded. "The very same. She lost everything because of Blackstone's gang because of me. Her fiancé to a bullet, her brother to my betrayal." He closed his eyes briefly. "I've carried that guilt for 5 years, Vanessa. Every time I see your name, every time I call you Vanessa P., I'm reminded of what I did to her." Understanding dawned on Vanessa. This was the true burden Mitchell had been carrying, not just his criminal past, but the specific harm done to a woman with her initials, a woman he had wronged beyond redemption. "Have you ever tried to make amends to her directly?" she asked gently. Mitchell shook his head. "How could I? Nothing I could say or do would bring back the people she loved." "But you've been trying to atone ever since," Vanessa observed, "living honestly, helping others when you can." "It doesn't erase what happened," Mitchell said, his voice heavy with regret. "No," Vanessa agreed, "but it matters, Mitchell. Who you choose to be now matters." Mitchell looked at her with such naked vulnerability that it made her heart ache. "How can you look at me the way you do, knowing what I've done?" "Because I see all of you," Vanessa said simply. "The man you were and the man you've become. And I love the whole of you, Mitchell Vale, past, present, and future." Mitchell stared at her, wonder and disbelief warring in his expression. "I don't deserve your love." "Love isn't about deserving," Vanessa replied, reaching up to touch his face gently. "It's about seeing and accepting and choosing every day." Mitchell covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a kiss to her palm. "I love you, Vanessa Porter. I have since the moment you invited me to that picnic, though I tried not to." "I know," Vanessa smiled. "You weren't very good at hiding it." A soft laugh escaped him, perhaps the first genuine laugh she had ever heard from him. "No, I suppose not." Their moment was interrupted by the return of Sheriff Wilson, his expression grave but not unkind. "I've wired the federal marshal's office about tonight's events," he informed them. "Included the information about Blackstone's death and your cooperation, Vale, or should I say Vance." Mitchell straightened. "What happens now?" "That depends on them," Wilson replied. "But I put in a good word for you, said you've been an upstanding citizen in Whitewater Creek and were defending yourself and others tonight." He paused, then added, I also mentioned that the statute of limitations has likely expired on most of what you were involved with, given that it's been 5 years and you were never directly implicated in any killings. Vanessa felt a surge of hope. Do you think that will make a difference? Wilson shrugged. Hard to say, but I doubt they'll send someone all the way out here just to question a reformed outlaw about a gang that's long since been broken up, especially with the ringleader dead. Mitchell rose, extending his hand to the sheriff. Thank you, Wilson. Whatever happens, I appreciate what you've done. The sheriff shook his hand firmly. You've proven yourself a man of character since you came here, Vale. That counts for something in my book. He looked between Mitchell and Vanessa. Now get yourselves home, it's been a long night. They rode back to the Porter homestead as dawn was breaking, the eastern sky painted in shades of pink and gold. Edward was waiting on the porch, having clearly not slept all night. When he saw them approaching both on horseback, both upright, the relief on his weathered face was palpable. You're both all right, he called as they dismounted. Mitchell's been shot, Vanessa reported, but it's not serious. The bounty hunters have been dealt with. Edward's gaze went to Mitchell's bandaged shoulder, then to his face. Come inside, both of you. You look dead on your feet. Over coffee and a hastily prepared breakfast, they recounted the night's events. Edward listened without interruption, his face grave but not judgmental. So Blackstone is dead, he said when they had finished, and the law may or may not come calling. Mitchell nodded. That's the long and short of it, sir. Edward studied him for a long moment. What will you do if they do come? Face them, Mitchell said simply. I'm done running. And if they want to take you in, Mitchell glanced at Vanessa, then back to her father. That depends on whether I have something worth coming back to. The implied question hung in the air between them. Edward looked at his daughter, a question in his eyes. Vanessa met his gaze steadily, her feelings evident in her expression. Edward sighed deeply. I'm an old man, Vale. Set in my ways and not given to changing my mind easily. But I've watched you these past months, how you conduct yourself, how you treat others, how you look at my daughter. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The measure of a man isn't in his worst moments, but in how he faces them and what he becomes afterward. Mitchell waited, hardly daring to breathe. If my daughter has chosen you, Edward continued, then I won't stand in her way, but I have one condition. Name it, Mitchell said immediately. No more secrets, Edward said firmly. No more hiding. Whatever comes, law, trouble, nightmares from the past, you face it together, out in the open. Mitchell nodded solemnly. You have my word. Edward turned to Vanessa. And you, daughter, are you certain this is what you want? It won't be an easy road. Vanessa reached across the table, taking Mitchell's hand in hers. The easy road isn't always the right one, Father. I love him. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Edward looked between them, then nodded once, decisively. Then you have my blessing for what it's worth. He rose from the table, leaning on his cane. Now I'm going to bed. Been up all night worrying about you too. Wake me if the law shows up. With that pragmatic blessing, Edward left them alone in the kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the windows. Mitchell turned to Vanessa, wonder in his eyes. Did that just happen? Vanessa smiled, squeezing his hand. It did. Though I think we should wait for a proper proposal until we know you won't be hauled off to prison. Mitchell laughed softly, the sound warming Vanessa's heart. That seems wise. His expression grew serious. Vanessa, whatever happens with the law, you should know I meant what I said. I'm done running. From my past, from myself, from the possibility of happiness. If they come for me, I'll go peacefully, serve whatever time they deem necessary, and come back to you, if you'll wait. I'll wait, Vanessa promised without hesitation, however long it takes. The next 3 weeks passed in a state of suspended anticipation. Mitchell continued his work with the horses, though he no longer took on guide jobs that would take him away from Whitewater Creek for extended periods. He spent most evenings at the Porter homestead, helping with chores and sharing meals, gradually becoming part of their small family unit. The town's reaction to the gunfight and the revelation of Mitchell's true identity was mixed. Some, like Martha Dawson, were supportive, viewing his past as just that past. Others were more wary, watching him with renewed suspicion when he came to town. But no one openly confronted him, and Sheriff Wilson made it clear that as far as he was concerned, Mitchell Vale was a valued member of the community who had helped stop dangerous men. Finally, a telegram arrived for Sheriff Wilson from the federal marshal's office. He rode out to the Porter place himself to deliver the news. Mitchell, who had been mending a fence with Edward, straightened as he saw the sheriff approach. Vanessa came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, her heart in her throat. "Wilson," Mitchell greeted, setting down his tools. "You've heard something?" The sheriff dismounted, pulling a telegram from his pocket. "Got word from the federal marshal." His expression gave nothing away. Vanessa moved to stand beside Mitchell, taking his hand openly. Edward remained a few paces behind, his face solemn. "Well?" Mitchell prompted when Wilson didn't immediately continue. The sheriff unfolded the telegram, cleared his throat, and read. "Regarding Matthew Vance, formerly associated with Blackstone Gang, information confirmed Blackstone deceased, Vance never directly implicated in killings. Statute of limitations expired on lesser charges. No action to be taken unless new evidence emerges. Case considered closed." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Vanessa let out a small cry of joy, throwing her arms around Mitchell's neck. He stood frozen in disbelief for a heartbeat, then wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet in an uncharacteristic display of emotion. "It's over," he whispered against her hair. "It's really over." Edward approached, clapping a hand on Mitchell's shoulder. "Congratulations, son. You've been given a clean slate." Sheriff Wilson folded the telegram and handed it to Mitchell. "Thought you might want to keep this. Official confirmation that Matthew Vance is no longer wanted by the law." Mitchell accepted the paper with a hand that trembled slightly. "Thank you, Wilson." "For everything," the sheriff nodded. "Just keep living the way you have been, Vale. That's thanks enough." He glanced between Mitchell and Vanessa with a knowing smile. "I expect I'll be hearing wedding bells before too long." Mitchell looked at Vanessa, a question in his eyes. She smiled up at him, her answer clear in her expression. "I believe you will," Mitchell confirmed, his voice steady with newfound certainty. As winter descended on Whitewater Creek, the town prepared for the Christmas season. Fresh snow blanketed the landscape, transforming the rugged terrain into a pristine wonderland. The Porter's homestead, usually quiet and isolated, had become a hub of activity as preparations for a Christmas Eve wedding neared completion. Vanessa stood at her bedroom window, watching Mitchell chop wood in the yard below. Even after 3 months, she sometimes found it hard to believe how much her life had changed. The weight of duty that had defined her existence for so long had transformed into something lighter, something shared. Edward, to her surprise, had flourished with Mitchell's presence in their home, finding in him both a helper and a companion who appreciated his stories and respected his wisdom. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Martha Dawson entered, carrying a carefully wrapped package. "I've finished the alterations," Martha announced, laying the package on the bed and unfolding it to reveal Vanessa's mother's wedding dress, now adjusted to fit Vanessa perfectly. "Try it on one last time, just to be sure." Vanessa slipped into the simple white dress, the delicate lace at the collar and cuffs as beautiful as when her mother had worn it 27 years earlier. Martha circled her, making minute adjustments and nodding with satisfaction. "Perfect," she declared. "Mitchell won't be able to take his eyes off you." Vanessa smiled, smoothing her hands over the fabric. "Thank you, Martha, not just for this, but for everything. Your support has meant so much to us both." Martha waved away the gratitude. "What are friends for? Besides, it's the most romantic thing I've ever witnessed. Reformed outlaw falls in love with steadfast homesteader's daughter. Why, it's like something from a novel," she sighed dreamily. "And the way he looks at you, Vanessa, like you're the sun, moon, and stars all rolled into one." A commotion from downstairs drew their attention, men's voices, laughter, the sound of the door opening and closing. Quickly changing back into her everyday clothes, Vanessa went downstairs to find Mitchell and Edward in the kitchen with Sheriff Wilson and Tom Dawson, all 4 men covered in snow and looking pleased with themselves. "What have you all been up to?" Vanessa asked suspiciously. Mitchell grinned, an expression that had become more frequent in recent months. Can't a man have secrets before his wedding? Not in this house, Vanessa replied firmly. Not anymore, remember, Mitchell laughed, the sound still a marvel to Vanessa's ears. Fair enough. We've been setting up a surprise, but you'll have to wait until tomorrow to see it. A wedding present, Vanessa guessed. The men exchanged conspiratorial glances. Something like that, Edward said, his eyes twinkling. Now stop pestering us and go finish whatever secret women's business you and Martha are up to. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the sky a perfect blue. The small church in Whitewater Creek had been decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for Christmas, providing a festive backdrop for the ceremony. Nearly everyone in town attended, the pews filled with people who had come to accept Mitchell as one of their own. Vanessa stood with her father at the back of the church, her arm linked through his as they prepared to walk down the aisle. Edward, dressed in his best suit, looked at his daughter with pride and a touch of wistfulness. "You look just like your mother," he said softly. "She would be so proud of you today. Do you think she would approve?" Vanessa asked. "Of Mitchell, I mean." Edward considered the question seriously. "Your mother always believed in second chances and in judging people by their actions rather than their words." "Yes, I think she would approve of the man he has become." He squeezed her arm gently. "Are you ready, daughter?" Vanessa nodded, her heart full to bursting. "More than ready." The wedding was simple but deeply meaningful. Mitchell, standing at the altar in a new suit, watched Vanessa approach with an expression of such love and wonder that it brought tears to many eyes in the congregation. They exchanged traditional vows in clear, steady voices, pledging to love and honor each other through all the seasons of their lives. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Mitchell cupped Vanessa's face in his hands and kissed her with tender reverence. The church erupted in applause, led by Martha Dawson's enthusiastic cheers. The celebration afterward was held in the town hall, transformed once again from its usual utilitarian function into a space of warmth and festivity. Food brought by every family in town covered long tables, and the local musicians played cheerful tunes as children darted between the adults' legs and couples took to the floor to dance. As evening approached, Mitchell drew Vanessa aside. "Are you ready for your surprise now?" "I've been ready all day," she replied with a smile. "Lead on, husband." Mitchell helped her into her coat and led her outside where a sleigh waited, decorated with ribbons and pulled by two of their own horses. Edward was already seated inside, wrapped in blankets against the cold. "Where are we going?" Vanessa asked as Mitchell handed her into the sleigh. "You'll see," Mitchell replied mysteriously, taking the reins. They traveled through town and out along the road that led to the Porter homestead. But before they reached it, Mitchell turned the sleigh onto a side trail that Vanessa had rarely used. After a few minutes, they emerged into a clearing where a small cabin stood, smoke curling invitingly from its chimney, windows glowing with warm light. "What is this?" Vanessa asked, confusion and delight mingling in her voice. Mitchell helped her from the sleigh, then Edward. "This," he said proudly, "is our home if you want it to be." Vanessa looked from Mitchell to her father, who was smiling broadly. "Father, it was Mitchell's idea," Edward explained. "A place of your own, but close enough to the homestead that you can still help with chores and I'm not left completely to my own devices. The men in town helped me build it," Mitchell added. "We've been working on it in secret for weeks. It's not grand, but Vanessa silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect," she whispered against his lips. "Absolutely perfect." Mitchell led them inside, where a fire crackled in the hearth and simple but well-crafted furniture filled the main room. A kitchen area occupied one corner, a dining table another. Two doors led off the main room, one to what Vanessa assumed was the bedroom, the other still closed. "This door," Mitchell said, leading her to the closed one, "leads to the final part of your surprise." He opened it to reveal a small room with empty bookshelves lining one wall, a desk beneath the window, and a chalkboard mounted on another wall. "Your schoolroom," Mitchell explained. "For now, just for reading and study, but someday perhaps for teaching. The town is growing. They'll need a proper teacher eventually." Tears filled Vanessa's eyes as she took in the room the physical manifestation of the dream she had shared with Mitchell months ago, a dream she had thought long abandoned. "You remembered," she whispered. "Of course I remembered," Mitchell said softly. "Your dreams matter, Vanessa, they always will." Edward cleared his throat, clearly moved but attempting to maintain his usual gruff demeanor. "Well, I'll be heading back to the house now. Leave you two to get settled." He embraced his daughter, then shook Mitchell's hand firmly. "Take care of each other." After Edward had gone, driven home in the sleigh by Tom Dawson, who had been waiting nearby, Mitchell and Vanessa stood alone in their new home. The reality of it, of being husband and wife, of having this space that was entirely their own, felt both surreal and perfectly right. "Are you happy?" Mitchell asked, drawing her into his arms. Vanessa looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her. The shadows that had haunted his eyes when they first met were still there, perhaps would always be there in some form, but they no longer defined him. What she saw now was hope, purpose, and a love so profound it humbled her. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. Mitchell brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I spent so many years running from what I'd done, carrying the weight of my mistakes. I never thought I'd find peace, let alone joy. And now," Vanessa prompted gently, "now I understand that forgiveness isn't something you earn through punishment or penance," Mitchell said. "It's a gift freely given that allows the possibility of redemption." He touched her face reverently. "You gave me that gift, Vanessa. You forgave me without even knowing what for." "Because I saw your heart," Vanessa replied simply. "Beyond the guilt and the regret, I saw a good man trying to find his way back to himself." Mitchell kissed her then, pouring all the love and gratitude he felt into the gesture. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vale," he whispered. "Welcome home, Mr. Vale," she echoed, knowing that for both of them, home wasn't just this cabin or Whitewater Creek or even Montana territory. Home was the safety and acceptance they had found in each other's hearts, a place where past mistakes could be acknowledged without defining the future, where forgiveness opened the door to new beginnings, and where love was both the journey and the destination. As snow began to fall softly outside their window, Mitchell and Vanessa Vale stood in each other's arms, no longer divided by secrets or regret, but united in the shared conviction that whatever challenges life might bring, they would face them together with courage, with honesty, and with an abiding love that had the power to heal even the deepest wounds of the past.